Hey everyone, welcome to another Stukent expert session. My name is Shannon Pavelski, and today we're happy to have Zach Olsen with us. Zach is the Web Analytics Manager at Columbia Sportswear in Portland, Oregon, and today Zach is going to be giving us an introduction to Adobe Analytics. He'll explain what it is, how it is different from other analytics platforms, and how you can start learning about it. So without further ado, Zach, take it away.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. I am Zach Olsen, and this will be an introduction to Adobe Analytics. What you see on your screen now is a screenshot of what Adobe calls their Adobe Experience Cloud. So Adobe Analytics lives under the umbrella of their Experience Cloud as part of their, underneath that, Adobe Analytics Cloud. So the idea is that Adobe has a whole suite of tools that marketers, advertisers, site owners can use to be able to grow their business and analyze the traffic that they get and all kinds of things. And I show this slide just to put in context where Adobe lives within the Adobe ecosystem. You've probably heard of the Adobe Creative Cloud, which is their Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator, and this is their Experience Cloud. And so at the bottom of the screen too, you'll see there's Adobe Analytics actually has multiple names. Originally, it was called Site Catalyst, which was one of the products within the company Omniture. So Omniture was a company just like Adobe. They had a whole suite of products, and one of them was an analytics product that was called Site Catalyst. Adobe bought Omniture, and they rebranded and started to call it for a while Adobe Site Catalyst. And now, I don't know, maybe nearly a decade ago or so, they started calling it Adobe Analytics. So if you ever hear somebody say Omniture or Site Catalyst, they're actually talking about Adobe Analytics. So Adobe Analytics is huge. Here's just a short list of some of the huge companies that use Adobe Analytics. Nike, Walmart, Target, all different kinds of verticals, whether it's e-commerce, technology, content, all kinds of stuff. And so Adobe Analytics is an incredibly powerful and very widely used tool. So why is it so hard to learn about? If you've noticed, it's not that easy to get an Adobe Analytics account, and that is because it's paid only. There is no such thing as a free Adobe Analytics account. And it's also very expensive. Whereas Google Analytics is absolutely free. You could create a WordPress site and upload Google Analytics on it and instantly see all kinds of metrics and segments and dimensions related to user activity on your site, all for free. And if you went to Google and did a search for any kind of question related to Google Analytics, you'd find a plethora of amateur to professional articles about how to use Google Analytics. But that's not the case with Adobe Analytics. Why is that? Well, first, as I show here, business owners are reluctant to share their proprietary and potentially competitive information publicly. Also, since this is a paid tool, Adobe has little incentive to be that helpful because they sell consulting hours. So a company like Target or The Gap or Wells Fargo or Ticketmaster, they spend around at least $100,000 or more a year for Adobe Analytics. They pay what Adobe calls a server call, which is basically every single time data is sent to Adobe servers. On top of that, it's not unnormal to have some paid for technical consultants at Adobe to implement your Adobe Analytics on your site. And they could do that for maybe a 9-month contract of requirements gathering, implementation, testing, and then final, help with reporting and everything. And it's not unlikely that could cost upwards of, $100,000 to $150,000. And then most of these companies also use Adobe Analytics within the whole suite of Adobe products. So they might have Adobe Target, Adobe Media Optimizer, all kinds of things. And so you can see how pretty quickly these big companies spend anywhere from $250,000 to $750,000 to Adobe a year. So Adobe is killing it. In other words, they make lots of money, and that's because there's a really high perceived value of these tools to be able to understand what users are doing and how to influence user behavior to get more value out of the traffic and more value out of the website that these companies have. Okay, so why is it so popular? Why don't these companies just use Google Analytics for free? There are some notable exceptions where companies do choose to use the free version of Google Analytics. But mostly people like Adobe Analytics because it's highly customizable. Whereas you can turn on Google Analytics on your personal website and right out of the box you get all kinds of default reports. Adobe Analytics is not like that. There are some out of the box reports, but it's also very, very customizable. So every single company's implementation and the kinds of reports and the kind of data they look at is either slightly or very different. Also, it's popular because it's integrated with all the other tools that I just mentioned. There's lots of support. So when you're a large company like Columbia or North Face, Patagonia, or any other big company, and you have a problem with your data or the tracking on your website, you want to be able to pick up the phone and call someone and say, hey, will you fix this or something is wrong? No such phone exists for Google Analytics. If you haven't noticed, there's really very limited support. If something breaks on your website and tracking stopped working, you don't have a phone number to call and get Google Analytics on the line to solve your problem. That's not the case with Adobe Analytics. Of course, it costs money, but to have that kind of security is really valuable to customers of Adobe Analytics. And it's a self-service tool. So not only is this incredibly customizable and powerful tool useful or needed, but then also you can put it in the hands of lots of different people within an organization, and they can all become much more data-driven. But therein lies a bit of a problem. So you can see here it's highly customizable, but also highly accessible. And this creates an environment where users are constantly confused on how to access the right data, how to interpret the data, and how to modify the data. So if you get to know anybody who works for an organization that has Adobe Analytics, you probably won't have to wait very long to hear some complaints about the kinds of reports or data that they have. And that is because the data that comes out of Adobe Analytics is only as good as your implementation. And it requires lots of know-how and understanding and basically skills that a developer has with JavaScript and otherwise to be able to get the code on the page to pass the right information to Adobe in the right way, and then to configure it in the right way in the report so that you can get the answers that you want. This is awesome for Adobe because it means they constantly have a source of revenue for everyone who wants to use their tool. It's sucky for everybody who's an end user who has tried to learn to use the tool on their own. There are lots of nuances, and it seems very straightforward, but oftentimes it's easy to get caught up and be looking at things that you think mean one thing when in fact they mean something else. So first of all, I thought it would be useful to go off of the definitions, a couple definitions here. This isn't unique to Adobe Analytics, but I think this is an important qualifier before we get into a couple more slides further on. First of all is this definition of dimensions and metrics. So a dimension is an attribute of a visitor on your website. It can be the source, like I've got here. Dimension is your referring URL you came from, or the campaign, or the country you're in. It could be a technology information, whereas what browser you're using. Could be the kinds of things you did while you're on the site, what page you looked at, if you played a video, if you made a search, all those kinds of things. Those are all dimensions. A metric is a number, a quantitative measurement. Here's a list of a bunch of different kinds of metrics. Again, none of these are unique to Adobe Analytics. These are all probably in your Google Analytics implementation as well. Maybe required some customization there within the admin section of Google Analytics, but these are all the different ways that you can measure things, but you got to have the things to measure are the dimensions. So you might want to look at a dimension of users that come from Google, and you say, okay, so I know that dimension exists. Now, how do I want to measure it? What's the bounce rate of visitors that come to Google? What's the number of searches on the site that users make who come from Google? This is an important distinction to make, the dimensions versus metrics. And we get into Adobe's specific kind of nomenclature or jargon that they use for their implementation. If you ever talk to anybody about Adobe Analytics, you'll start to hear things called EVARs, props, and success events. EVARs are a custom variable, called a conversion variable, or a custom dimension. So there's lots of out-of-the-box dimensions, like we were talking about with Adobe Analytics. Something like the city that the user is from when they visit your site. You don't have to do anything custom. Adobe Analytics does that by themselves. But let's say you have a specific thing on your site. Let's say you're a shoe store and you have a shoe finder tool where the user comes in and they put in, what kind of activity they're interested in, whether it's hiking or running or cycling. And when they choose running, and then it says what kind of running, trail running or this running, right? You go through this tool and it spits out, hey, these are some shoes that we recommend that you should buy. In this particular case, you've got a unique tool on your own site and you want to measure stuff with it. So you probably use an EVAR or a conversion variable to say, every time somebody enters that information in the beginning of that tool that says what kind of shoe they're looking for, pass that data into my EVAR or to my custom dimension. That way, when I look in my reports, I can say, oh, here's my custom dimension of users who selected running shoes, and then I can choose a metric, say how many people did that, or the metric of what was the conversion rate, or a metric of how many page views did they look at after they used the tool, etc. Props are traffic variables, which is just another kind of custom dimension. They are very much less popular than EVARs. They don't tell you so much who, which, or what affected conversion. They tell you how many. Not to get too in the weeds, but props need to be implemented on every single page, whereas an EVAR can fire once and it's quote unquote sticky to the customer. So a user can use a tool on your site and that EVAR will then be associated with them throughout the rest of their session, whereas a prop has to be set on every single page. The last one is a success event, and this is just your kind of metric, any kind of custom numerical thing that you want to count on your site. So you might have something where you have a search bar on your site and you want to count how often people do internal search. That would be a unique success event, right? So a fun way to learn how all this stuff works is to use Adobe's Debugger tool. I put in this little short URL that'll take you to this page that you see a screenshot on. You take that code there that sits on the page, you copy that, or you click and you can drag it up into the toolbar of your browser, and it gives you this little button. Then you can push that button on any website that's using Adobe Analytics, and you get to look at all the different data that the site is using. So let's do that for fun. Here is Chrome. I've got the Home Depot website up. I have no affiliation with Home Depot whatsoever, but they use Adobe Analytics. And here I've got my Adobe Debugger button. So I'm on the home page, and I click this button, and a little screen pops up, and I can now look at all of the data that Home Depot is sending to Adobe Analytics. I have no idea what some of this stuff means, and I can only really infer what some of it means because, like I said, I'm not an employee here or anything, but I can see here, first of all, they have a report suite ID of Home Depot Prod. That refers to this site being their production website, whereas most sites, almost all sites, have a staging site where they initially test and make sure everything looks good, and then they publish their testing version or their test site to production. And so they've named the report suite Home Depot Prod. The way Adobe Analytics works is kind of like Google Analytics has different profiles. Adobe Analytics has report suites. And so you can situate your report suites on a bunch of different kinds of ways. In this case, they're just sending all their traffic for homedepot.com, it looks like, to their one report suite. Okay, got some other gobbledygook in here, not as exciting. They have a page name called Homepage. In Adobe Analytics, you set a page name for every single page via some kind of code that tells it what to be. But this is a little bit different than Google Analytics. Google Analytics just uses the URL of the page, whereas with Adobe Analytics, you give each page a name. They call this page the homepage. Okay, so now we can see here are those props. There's some EVARs. there was, let's see, is there any events? I don't see any events. So in this case, we can see prop 1, 2, 3, 5, I'll say homepage. I don't know why. Prop 13 says repeat. I'm a repeat visitor to this site, so they probably use prop 13 to be able to capture whether repeat or new visitors. They load that on every page of the site and be able to analyze that dimension in that way. EVAR 25 says desktop because I'm on a desktop computer. I bet if I visited the site on a mobile device, this would say mobile. This allows them to create segments for all of their analysis to be able to look at it. Of all the people who looked on pages on the site, how many of them looked at desktop versus mobile? We've got here more homepage stuff. This says landscape. My guess is that's probably referred to, you know, how you can hold your phone to the side and it goes to landscape mode versus vertical. They're doing some time parting here where they have the time and the day that I visited. Anyways, then let's say I go and I go to shop by room entryway. Here I'll load a new page about mud rooms. It looks like. I'll click the Adobe Debugger button again and load all kinds of new stuff. This is a different kind of page. So they're let's see. The page name is Shop by Room Entryways. They've got some non-cross-sell. They probably have some kind of reports that say whether or not they're doing cross-sells. This is a non-search page. I didn't use their search, so this is they're doing a dimension for looking at people who browse the site versus search on the site. EVAR 31 passes the page name in again. Got that GPS access granted for prop 4. I don't remember giving them access, but apparently I have. No template. This EVAR 69 says less than 1 day. My guess there is probably they have a cookie that they've placed in my browser, and every time I come to the site, it measures how long it's been since I've been here the last time. So since this is my first time, it says less than 1 day. Anyways, you get the idea. This is all the kind of data and customization that goes on for Adobe Analytics implementation. So capturing the data is one thing. Analyzing is another. It's not very helpful to say, hey, we have tons of data if you can't really look at it or analyze it or segment it or compare it to other kinds of things. So that's where the other side of Adobe comes in, which is with their data visualization tools. I'm going to load here some YouTube videos. If you go to YouTube and search for Adobe Analytics, they have a channel with a whole bunch of training videos that show you how to use their tools. This one that we're going to look at is called Analysis Workspace. It's a data visualization tool that allows you to look at all the data you're capturing via your implementation, and then ideally find actionable insights that help move the needle with meeting your business objectives. So here you can see this is a project, and here's they have the dimensions. They have all these dimensions listed. Here are metrics, all the metrics, and below that you can see segments. And I'm just going to press play and then jump ahead here a little bit. And you can, what I want to show you is how there's this drag and drop functionality. Jumping around. Okay, so he's going to grab a dimension from that left column and drop it into the workspace area, the freeform area. And so, oh, I missed it. He dropped orders there, and then it loads, and he loads orders by day, right? And so then he can take any other dimension and lay it on top of that table. In this case, he did day of week, so now you can see day of week for orders. It's pretty slick. This is, again, Analysis Workspace, which just allows you to visualize your data, to break it down in any kind of way that you want. I think there's something else he does here. You can search. So he finds another dimension which has the more time parting kind of data about morning and night. He drags, drops that on top of a day of the week, and there you can see orders for Thursdays, and then Thursdays, mornings versus evenings. Very fast and cool way of being able to get at the data that you want to see. Now he's going to go and he's going to pull out hour of day, another time parting dimension, and lay that on top of PM. So you can say, of Thursdays at night, which is the most popular hour of day to do orders. And that's what he's looking at now, is 14 o'clock, it looks like. So that's Analysis Workspace. I got a couple other videos on here. This one's already running. This is an example of using Analysis Workspace to create a big dashboard. I wonder if you get the idea. There's all kinds of visualizations you can do. Here's one more. In this one, he's got last touch channel. What that means is, of all the different marketing channels that you have driving traffic to your site, which one did the user interact with last before they purchased? And so you can see direct, email, referring domains, social networks. And he's got two columns that two different metrics he's using to compare that dimension: visits and orders. And so if we jump ahead, we can see how you can right-click on any column and then compare a time range to another time range within Adobe Analytics. And so there you go. There's orders for that time range in one column, orders for this other time range here for your different channels, and you'll be able to quickly compare the different order amounts over time. So anyways, that's the Workspace analysis tool within Adobe Analytics. Go to YouTube and watch more of those videos. I've given you a brief overview of Adobe Analytics, how it works when it comes to the implementation side, a little bit of how the analyst uses that data, once it's been captured within Workspace analysis. The ability to understand and use Adobe Analytics is really valuable, as we've seen a lot of those really big companies use it. The hard part is getting the experience in those tools. I was lucky enough to, at the beginning of my career, work for a company that used Adobe Analytics and got that experience, which has been able to propel me to my position today. And I think that if you're interested in web analytics, interested in a career in data analysis, specifically for e-commerce or online companies, Adobe Analytics is a valuable tool to learn and know. And I would refer you to YouTube to learn more about it. There's a lot of videos, like I said, on there that you can watch that are a little dry if you haven't ever had access, but it can give you an idea. And there's also, although there's not as much, there is some help articles and resources out there on Google. If you search for Help Center, Adobe Help Center, there's all kinds of documentation about how to use and implement Adobe Analytics. Thanks. That's the conclusion of this meeting. I hope you enjoyed it.